On Sunday, in a seismic election, Hungarians voted to oust their Prime Minister of 16 years, Viktor Orbán, and replace him with centre-right opposition leader Péter Magyar. Magyar's Teaser party won a landslide victory, winning 138 out of 199 seats, more than the two-thirds needed for a parliamentary supermajority, compared to 55 seats won by Orbán's Fidesz party. After the election, which saw a record turnout of 79%, Orbán conceded defeat, calling the result painful but clear. Meanwhile, Hungary's incoming Prime Minister Magyar said, "We will never again allow anyone to hold free Hungary captive or to abandon it. Hungary will be a strong ally in the European Union and NATO again." So, in this video, we'll explain Hungary's 2026 election results, how Magyar pulled off such a feat, and what might happen next. To understand why this election was so important, we need to recap the past 16 years of Hungarian politics. When Viktor Orbán came to power in Hungary in 2010, leading the right-wing populist Fidesz party, it was on a platform supporting traditional Christian values, Hungarian nationalism, electoral and constitutional reform, and opposing Western liberalism. Since then, Orbán's government has installed party loyalists in Hungary's courts and institutions, skewed the electoral system in its favour, and pursued closer relations with Russia while distancing itself from the EU. As a result, in 2022 and 2023, the EU froze over €20 billion in funds earmarked for Hungary over rule of law concerns and democratic backsliding, with around €10 billion released in December 2023 following judicial reforms. Hungary has also repeatedly disrupted EU foreign policy by blocking Ukraine aid packages. Despite this, between 2010 and 2022, Orbán's Fidesz party won every election with around 50% of the vote. Since the 2022 election, though, Fidesz's support in the polls has rapidly declined, while a new party, the centre-right pro-EU Teaser party, has surged. For context, in early 2024, Teaser emerged as a major challenger to Fidesz in the wake of a political scandal. In January 2024, Hungary's then-president Katalin Novak and Orbán's justice minister and Magyar's ex-wife Judit Varga resigned after it emerged they'd pardoned a man involved in covering up a sex abuse scandal at a children's home. This sparked huge anti-government protests, particularly as Fidesz had always presented itself as a defender of Christian family values. Anyway, in February 2024, then Fidesz member Péter Magyar quit the party and went on a media spree, repeatedly accusing Orbán's Fidesz government of corruption. Magyar then joined Teaser, a pre-existing but little-known centrist Big Tent party that was formed back in 2021, but was basically dormant until Magyar joined, catapulting Teaser and himself into the spotlight. Despite relatively few resources, Teaser managed to win nearly 30% of the vote at the June 2024 European elections, and by late 2024 had overtaken Fidesz in the national opinion polls. Throughout 2025, Teaser continued to rise, opening up a steady 10-point lead over Fidesz, with the final pre-election polls putting it on nearly 50% support. As such, in the days leading up to Sunday's election, Orbán intensified efforts to secure Fidesz's victory. As well as claiming that Serbia had found explosives near a pipeline transporting Russian gas to Hungary, a move some experts called a Russian false flag operation designed to influence the election by framing Ukraine, Orbán also hosted US Vice President Vance, a close ideological ally, in Budapest last week, hoping to galvanise the anti-EU vote. Vance accused the EU of, quote, one of the worst examples of foreign election interference he'd ever seen, adding they hate this guy, and urging Hungarians to, quote, go to the polls at the weekend, stand with Viktor Orbán. While there's no doubt that the EU was hoping for a Magyar victory, the bloc stayed noticeably quiet about Hungary during the campaign, presumably to avoid giving Orbán the opportunity to accuse it of election interference. And anyway, pre-election surveys showed the Hungarian public were largely supportive of the EU. A report published in early April by the European Council on Foreign Relations, for instance, found that 77% of Hungarian voters support EU membership, 75% trust the EU, and 68% want at least some adjustments in Hungary's approach to it. The final thing to mention here is that electoral reforms introduced by Orbán's government over the past decade also tilted the playing field in Fidesz's favour. Big liberal cities like Budapest and Szeged were given their own districts, concentrating opposition votes in fewer seats, and smaller Teaser-leaning towns were combined with Fidesz voting rural areas to water down the Teaser vote. Moreover, large numbers of undecided voters and ethnic Hungarians in neighbouring countries who tend to back Fidesz made a Tisza victory far from guaranteed. Anyway, this brings us to Sunday's election. In the end, Tisza won decisively with a parliamentary supermajority. Tisza won 138 out of 199 seats, Fidesz won 55, and the far-right Our Homeland movement won 6. Out of Hungary's 106 constituencies, Tisza led in 93, while Fidesz led in just 13. Addressing a crowd in Budapest after his victory, Magyar said Hungary had been liberated from the Orbán regime, comparing it to the Hungarian Revolution in 1848 and the 1956 uprising against the Soviet Union. He also alluded to a famous line from US President John F. Kennedy's 1961 inauguration speech, saying, "Today we won because the Hungarian people didn't ask what their country could do for them, but what they could do for their country." So, how did Magyar pull off such an impressive feat? Well, we see broadly two reasons why Magyar defeated Orbán. Firstly, Hungarians' economic frustrations, and secondly, Magyar's successful campaign. The first reason was voters' economic frustrations with Orbán. Between 2022 and 2023, Hungary was hit hard by inflation, which peaked at 25%, crushing Hungarian real wages. Orbán's government then implemented a range of targeted fiscal measures, including tax breaks and subsidies, which, given the suspension of EU funds, strained Hungary's public finances, with the country running a large deficit representing 4.9% of GDP in 2024. Hungary's debt servicing costs also spiked to a record €11.1 billion in 2024, diverting money away from key spending areas like public services. As such, Magyar made the effective argument that tackling corruption and restoring the rule of law would help fix the economy, as those reforms, if successful, should lead to the release of Hungary's frozen EU funds. The other reason Tisza won was Magyar's successful campaign. As well as speaking at hundreds of rallies over the past year, Magyar successfully used his insider knowledge of Fidesz to bolster his corruption allegations and criticism of Orbán. As such, Tisza, with a broadly socially conservative but pro-EU policy platform, managed to turn out not just traditional opposition voters, but also disillusioned Fidesz supporters, helping it win a landslide. Right now, though, Magyar will be focusing on removing any potential obstacles in the way of his premiership. He's called on Orbán to refrain from any measures or traps limiting the incoming Tisza government's room for manoeuvre, and has also called on the head of the top court, the chief prosecutor, and the head of Hungary's media authority and competition office to resign. Thanks to Tisza's supermajority, Magyar should also be able to amend Hungary's constitution, removing Fidesz loyalists from key state institutions and restoring Hungary's system of checks and balances. As we mentioned earlier, the latest edition of our magazine, Too Long, is out now. And if you subscribe using code TLDR26, then you'll get £4 off your first copy, bringing the price as low as £3.99, our lowest ever price, as well as getting you 20% off every future issue as long as you stay subscribed. Speaking of future editions, let me show you for the very first time this summer's edition of the magazine, currently entitled Trump's Rules of War. This map on the cover shows a dot for each region struck by Trump since returning to office last year, and there's always the chance it'll look even redder before we go to print. Inside this issue, we'll be running through each of these different conflicts, airstrikes, and incursions.
A little excursion to take care of nuclear weaponry?
Sorry, excursions. So if you want to track that timeline with us and better understand what's motivating Trump here, then you'll want a copy of this summer's Too Long, where we'll also be discussing a whole load of other topics. Luckily, if you subscribe today, you'll not only get the spring issue immediately, but you'll also be signed up for this summer too, ensuring this issue lands through your letterbox or in your inbox as soon as possible.